I was reborn. I snapped my eyes open, a strong smell of cooking oil rushing into my nose. I stood dazed in front of the stove, still holding the spatula. The meat in the pan was sizzling with oil. The familiar kitchen, the familiar stove, this was the restaurant I had run for 3 years. Wasn't I supposed to be dead? Memories surged up like a dam breaking. In my past life, tonight, my wife of 5 years, Fiona, would stage a scene with her lover in the shop. That man would pretend to be drunk and cause trouble, while Fiona would pretend to break up the fight. In reality, under their cover, an accomplice would slip into the back kitchen and open the gas valve. Then, a cigarette butt. Boom, my little shop would be blown to rubble. I didn't die in that explosion, but I suffered severe burns and lay in the ICU for 3 months. Fiona received a $1.2 million insurance payout. It was the accident insurance I had bought for the shop, with her listed as the beneficiary. Then she pulled out my oxygen tube. Right before I died, I heard that man say at the door of the ward, "Fiona, is it done? The money's in the account. We're flying abroad tomorrow for a vacation." That was the last thing I heard before I died. "Victor? Victor? Are you okay?" The voice of Sam, the kitchen assistant, pulled me back. I looked down at my hands, intact, no burn scars, no mottled skin from grafts. The calendar on the wall read, May 17, 2019. There was still an hour before the explosion. "It's nothing." I put down the spatula, my voice surprisingly calm. "Sam, you can leave early today. You'll still get paid." Sam asked in confusion, "Huh? The evening rush hasn't even started yet. Just listen to me and go." Though bewildered, Sam saw the look on my face and didn't ask further. He took off his apron and left. I pulled out my phone and glanced at the message. Fiona had sent a message 10 minutes ago, "Honey, a few friends are coming to the restaurant for dinner tonight. Make sure to prepare plenty of dishes." A cold smirk curled at the corner of my mouth. In my past life, I genuinely thought my wife was bringing friends to support the business. I was so happy that I busied myself, even going to the supermarket to buy the freshest ingredients. But what came were a pack of wolves. I turned off the stove and moved all the gas canisters in the kitchen to the empty lot behind the back door. I also checked every valve and pipe to make sure there were no leaks. Then I dialed a number. "Hello, police station. I want to report a crime. Someone is planning to cause an explosion to commit insurance fraud." After the call, I didn't rush back to the shop. I sat on the back steps and lit a cigarette. Since something like rebirth had happened, I might as well not waste the chance fate had given me. In my past life, I was too foolish. How foolish. Fiona had been with that man for 3 years, and I never even noticed. That man was named Hugh. He ran a used car dealership, looking decent on the surface, but in reality, he was just a thug. Fiona was his middle school classmate, and the two of them had been having an affair for a long time. For 5 years of marriage, I worked from dawn till dusk, handing over all my monthly earnings to Fiona. She used the money to buy bags and cosmetics, then turned around and booked hotel rooms with Hugh. I was still foolishly thinking my wife had it tough, that she had suffered by my side. Only on my deathbed did I find out that the daughter I raised for 5 years wasn't mine either. Just thinking about it makes me sick. Halfway through my cigarette, my phone rang. It was Fiona. "Honey, we're here. Where are you? Why is no one in the shop?" I put out the cigarette and lowered my voice. "I'm prepping ingredients in the back kitchen. You guys take a seat, I'll be right out." "Got it." I stood up, locked the back door, and walked around to the front to enter the shop. Fiona was sitting by the window, and beside her was a man, Hugh. The two of them were putting on quite an act, leaving an empty seat between them as if they barely knew each other. "Honey, this is Hugh, my middle school classmate. He's in the used car business." Fiona smiled gently. "Hugh, this is my husband, Victor. Victor, I've heard so much about you. Hugh stood up and extended his hand. I looked at his face, a wave of nausea rising in me, but I still shook it, forcing a smile. "You're too kind." In my past life, I really hadn't noticed, the looks between them were full of ambiguity. Now, it was clear as day, they were flirting right under my nose. "A few more friends are on their way, they'll be here soon," Fiona said, her gaze shifting toward the kitchen. "What is she looking at?" "Checking if smoke is coming out." I sneered inwardly, keeping my face expressionless. "All right, you two have some tea first. I'll go cook." I turned and walked into the kitchen, but didn't turn on the stove. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened an app, the surveillance camera feed from my shop. In my past life, I installed these for theft prevention, but they turned out to be useless, so I left them idle. After being reborn, the first thing I did was connect all the cameras to cloud storage. On the screen, Fiona and Hugh were whispering to each other. Unfortunately, there was no audio, so I couldn't hear what they were saying. But I can read lips. In my past life, I spent 3 months in the ICU, and out of boredom, I learned lip reading from the nurses. Fiona said, "He bought it." I checked the gas canister, it's still in the same place. Hugh said, "We'll make a move once Leo arrives. Find an excuse to get rid of the guests." Fiona said, "What about that camera?" Hugh said, "Cover it with a cloth. It won't capture anything." I turned off my phone and took a deep breath. In my past life, I died without knowing why. In this life, I'm going to record every last one of their faces, frame by frame. Chapter 2. 10 minutes later, Fiona's friends arrived. There were 4 of them in total, 3 men and 1 woman. I recognized the woman. Her name was Yolanda, Fiona's best friend, who had helped stage the scene in my past life. Among the 3 men, one was responsible for starting the fire. I walked out carrying a plate of food, smiling cheerfully. "Oh my, so many friends have come." "Fiona, you didn't tell me in advance, I don't have enough food." Fiona stood up and took my arm. "Honey, these are all my good friends. You know Yolanda. These gentlemen are Hugh's brothers." I nodded and greeted each person in turn, letting my gaze linger for an extra second on the man preparing to light the fire. He had a crew cut and tattoos all over his hands, clearly not someone to mess with. "Everyone, go ahead and eat and drink. I'll go cook," I said before heading back to the kitchen. This time, I actually turned on the stove. Not because I was afraid these people would suspect anything, but because I was genuinely hungry. I died on an empty stomach in my past life, so I need to make up for it in this one. I stir-fried 4 dishes. When I brought them out, the group was already drinking. Hugh raised his glass. "Victor, come on, a toast to you." I poured myself a beer, clinked glasses with him, and downed it in one go. Fiona watched from the side, a flicker of complexity in her eyes, but it was only there for a moment. I know what she's thinking. In my past life, right before she pulled out the oxygen tube, she leaned close to my ear and said, "Don't blame me. You can't give me the life I want." In this life, I can't give her the life she wants, but I can give her the ending she deserves. After a couple of rounds of drinks, Fiona suddenly stood up and said, "Oh, I forgot to buy cigarettes. Honey, will you come with me?" In my past life, this was her usual trick, getting me out of the way to give Hugh and the others time to make their move. I waved my hand and said, "Go ahead by yourself. I still need to cook, the guests haven't finished eating yet." Fiona's face stiffened for a moment, and Hugh immediately took over. "It's fine, it's fine. Fiona, you go ahead. We'll have a drink with Victor." Fiona had no choice but to leave alone. The moment she stepped out, Hugh shot a glance at the tattooed man. The tattooed man stood up, said he was going to the restroom, and headed toward the kitchen. I didn't stop him. Because I had already moved all the gas canisters out of the kitchen. The tattooed man rummaged around inside, probably confused, and didn't come out for a long time. Hugh shot another glance, and another man stood up, saying he would go help look. At that moment, footsteps sounded outside the shop door. Not just one person's, many people's. Freeze. Police. The door was pushed open, and 7 or 8 police officers entered. The one in front flashed his badge. Someone reported that a crime is being planned here. Everyone, cooperate with the investigation and take out your ID cards. Hugh's face turned pale instantly. The tattooed man happened to walk out of the back kitchen, still holding a lighter in his hand. Seeing the room full of police, the lighter clattered to the floor. Fiona had just returned from the convenience store and witnessed the scene at the door. Her legs went weak, and she only managed to stay upright by holding onto the doorframe. I put down the quilt and raised both hands, showing full cooperation. "Officer, I'm the one who called the police." The interrogation room at the police station was lit with harsh white light. I sat on the chair, facing Chief Zhou, whose shoulder insignia suggested he was a deputy station chief. "You say they were planning to cause an explosion to commit insurance fraud. Where's the evidence?" I handed over my phone, surveillance footage, the full recording from this afternoon to tonight. Chief Zhou took the phone and watched it. In the footage, Fiona and Hugh were whispering to each other, their lip movements clearly distinguishable. Although there was no sound, I had already transcribed their conversation into text and attached it alongside. "You can read lips?" Chief Zhou looked up at me. "I learned it in the ICU." I said this in a tone as flat as if I were commenting on the nice weather today. Chief Zhou didn't press further and continued examining the evidence. Next came the surveillance from outside the back door, footage of me moving the gas canister, as well as the tattooed man rummaging through the kitchen. There is another crucial piece of evidence, the insurance policy for my shop. It's an accident insurance policy with a coverage amount of 1.2 million, and the beneficiary is listed as Fiona. The policy was taken out 3 months ago, right around the time Fiona suggested buying insurance for the shop. "When did you realize something was wrong with them?" Chief Zhou asked. I didn't mention the rebirth, only saying, I went through her phone a few days ago and saw her chat history with Hugh. The lie was perfectly reasonable. Chief Zhou nodded. "We'll continue the investigation. You've cooperated well. If there's nothing else, you can head back now." I stood up and suddenly turned around as I reached the door. "Chief Zhou, I have one more request." "Speak." "I'd like to ask you to help with a DNA test. My daughter. I want to know if she's mine." Chief Zhou glanced at me, didn't ask any further, and simply nodded. Leaving the police station, it was already 2 in the morning. The night wind was chilly. I stood by the roadside and lit a cigarette. My phone buzzed. A message from Fiona. "Victor, you fucking set me up. I'm not done with you." I glanced at it, didn't reply, and directly blocked them. This venomous snake had finally shown its true colors. Chapter 3. For the next 3 days, I didn't open the shop, nor did I return to that so-called home. That house was bought with my full payment, but it was registered under Fiona's name. In my past life, I was foolish, thinking a wife deserved a sense of security. In this life, I'm going to take back what's rightfully mine. I found a lawyer, Lawyer Sue, in his 40s, wearing a pair of gold-rimmed glasses, known for being ruthless in divorce cases. Lawyer Sue looked at my situation, and his eyes behind the lenses lit up. "Your case is a sure win. Adultery during marriage, plotting to kill her husband, attempted insurance fraud, any one of these is enough to give her a hard time. The house may be in her name, but it's marital property, so you'll get at least half. Don't bother fighting for custody of your daughter. If the DNA test shows she's not yours, you won't have to pay a cent in child support." I said, "I don't want the house, I just want cash." Lawyer Sue asked in confusion, "Why?" "That house is worth at least 2 million on the market. Because I don't want any ties with her. Getting the house back would mean selling it, which is a hassle. I'll have her cash me out instead." Lawyer Sue smiled. "You've thought it through clearly. All right, I'll help you negotiate." That afternoon, I moved into a short-term rental apartment in the east of the city. 30 square meters, 1 bedroom and 1 bathroom, so shabby it didn't even have a proper kitchen. But I felt at ease. In my previous life, that home was filled everywhere with Fiona's perfume, cosmetics, and that child who wasn't my daughter. Every day I went back, I had to put on the act of a good father, playing with the kid, helping with homework, paying tuition, buying toys. And what did I get in return? That child couldn't even be bothered to call me Dad. After tidying up, I sat on the edge of the bed, took out my phone, and started scrolling through the news. A local story caught my attention. Wendy, chairwoman of the Eastern Suburb Catering Group, donates 5 million yuan to the city children's welfare home. The accompanying image is a photograph of a woman standing at the entrance of a welfare home, dressed in a white suit, with long hair flowing over her shoulders and a gentle smile. I stared at that face for 3 seconds, and then confirmed one thing. I had seen this woman before. Just last month, no, it was last month in my previous life. That day, it was pouring rain, and my small shop had no business, so I sat at the door watching the rain. A black Mercedes pulled over at the roadside, and a woman rushed out holding a child. The child's face was pale, and he was convulsing uncontrollably. The woman was frantic, trying to flag down cars on the street, but none stopped. Without a second thought, I locked up my shop, got into my beat-up van, and took the mother and child to the hospital. The doctor said the child had a febrile seizure and could have been in danger if they had arrived 10 minutes later. The woman was endlessly grateful and insisted on giving me money, but I refused. She left me a business card, saying I could reach out to her if I ever needed anything. I glanced at the business card, Wendy, chairwoman of the Eastern Suburb Catering Group. I casually stuffed the card into my pocket, and later Fiona threw it away while doing laundry. In my past life, I never sought out this woman. I thought that as a small restaurant owner, I was from a different world than a chairwoman. This life, though. I tossed my phone onto the bed, clasped my hands behind my head, and stared at the ceiling. It's different. In this life, I don't want to be that fool who just lowers his head and cooks anymore. The DNA test results came back sooner than expected. On the 5th day, I received a call from Chief Zhou. Victor, the results are out. According to the test, the child has no biological relationship with you. There was a 2-second silence on the other end of the line before Chief Zhou added, "Take care, brother." I said thank you and hung up. I thought I would feel upset, but when I actually heard the news, it felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For 5 years, I gave my all to a child who had no blood relation to me, cooking for her, putting her to sleep, getting up in the middle of the night to prepare her formula, and saving up money to enroll her in extracurricular classes. And that woman, while spending my money, was sleeping with someone else and plotting how to get rid of me. Is there anything more absurd in this world than that? Lawyer Sue called me that same afternoon, saying that Fiona had already received the subpoena and agreed to pretrial mediation. What does she want? I asked. Lawyer Sue said, she wants to keep the house and is willing to give you 800,000 in cash, paid in installments. I laughed. Installments? What does she take me for? A bank? That's exactly what I told her lawyer. Victor, what's your bottom line? 2 million, one-time payment, not a penny less. Also, I want half of the revenue she's generated at my shop over the years. Sam's salary, ingredient costs, utility bills, it's all in the books. She can't deny it. Lawyer Sue chuckled on the other end of the line, you're trying to drain her dry. She drained the life out of me in my past life. Lawyer Sue said, all right, I'll go talk to them. 3 days later, the mediation result came out. Fiona compensated me with 1.8 million, the house went to her, but I no longer had to bear the responsibility of supporting our daughter. The two of us signed the divorce agreement, and from then on, we owed each other nothing. I knew that at least 600,000 of that 1.8 million came from Hugh. That guy really went all out to protect Fiona. But it didn't matter. On the day the money arrived, I went to the bank, looked at the balance in my account, and took a deep breath. Adding in the savings from the small shop over the past few years, I now had 2.3 million in hand. That was enough for a decent down payment on a house in the city. But I didn't want to buy a house. I wanted to do something big. Chapter 4. I closed the restaurant. Sam almost cried when he heard the news. "Victor, you were doing so well here. How can you just shut it down like that?" I patted him on the shoulder. "Sam, you've got great skills. Don't waste your time here with me. I recommend you go to Shuxianggu in the south of the city. That big place will double your salary." After Sam left, I sat alone in the empty restaurant for a long time. On the wall were still photos from when I started my business. Back then, I was still green, wearing a faded apron, grinning at the camera. 7 years. I started learning to cook at 18 and opened this restaurant at 22. I went from 2 tables to 8, from making 500 yuan a day to 3,000. I gave the best years of my youth to this little shop, and the most foolish trust to that woman. It wasn't worth it. But isn't it through things that aren't worth it that we grow? I sold what I could, threw away what I couldn't, until all that was left was a kitchen knife I'd used for 7 years and a handwritten recipe book. On the last page of the recipe book, I drew a stove with a pot on it, and from the pot emerged a few words: "Start over." The next day, I went to an old street in the west of the city. There was a shop for rent there, twice the size of my original store, yet the rent was 30% cheaper. It was in a remote location, not on the main street. You had to turn into an alley and walk 50 meters to see it. But that was exactly what I liked about it. Being remote meant lower costs. Being remote could also mean, good wine needs no bush. I signed a 3-year contract, spent 400,000 on renovations, and another 300,000 on equipment. On opening day, only a few old regulars showed up. Wearing my white chef's uniform, I stood in front of the stove and cooked my first dish since my rebirth. I plated the dish and took a bite. Tears fell. In my previous life, I started learning to cook at 18, and my biggest dream was to open my own restaurant and cook the dishes I loved. I achieved that dream. Then that woman destroyed it. Now, I've picked it up again. On the 7th day after the new store opened, a special guest arrived. To be precise, there were 2 people, a woman holding a little girl of about 5 or 6 years old. The woman wore a dark blue trench coat, her long hair tied in a low ponytail, and her delicate features looked as if they had stepped out of a magazine. The little girl had her hair in 2 small buns and held a rabbit plush toy in her hand. I was prepping ingredients in the kitchen when I heard the wind chime at the door. I looked up and froze for a second. I recognized her. Wendy. The little girl, Anne, also recognized me. She let go of her mother's hand and ran over, her footsteps pattering. "Uncle. You're the uncle who took us to the hospital." I crouched down and smiled. "You still remember me?" "I remember. Mom said you're a good person." And said, then turned to look at her mother. Wendy walked over, a complex expression on her face, a mix of surprise, delight, and something indescribable. "Victor? Is it really you?" She looked me up and down. "What are you doing here?" I stood up and wiped my hands. "This is my shop, just opened." Wendy said, "Aren't you at the old shop closed?" I started over somewhere else. Wendy nodded and didn't ask further. She looked around the shop. The decor was simple but not crude, a few wooden tables, a white wall with a piece of calligraphy hanging on it that read, "Cook with Heart." "It's quite clean," she said. "Thank you." I turned to Wendy and smiled. "Little one, what would you like to eat? Uncle will make it for you." "I want, scrambled eggs with tomatoes." Wendy thought for a moment and said in a childish voice. I glanced at Wendy. "What about you? Just make whatever you're good at." I turned and went into the kitchen. Half an hour later, 3 dishes and a soup were on the table. Wendy picked up a piece of spare rib, chewed it twice, and her expression changed. "What's wrong? Doesn't it taste good?" I asked. "No. Wendy picked up another piece, savoring it carefully. This flavor, it tastes a lot like something someone used to make. Who? My dad. I was stunned for a moment. Wendy put down her chopsticks, her eyes slightly red. My dad used to be a chef, and the ribs he stir-fried tasted just like this. No MSG, no tenderizer, just pure heat control and caramelized sugar. After he passed away, I never tasted this flavor again. I didn't know how to respond, so I just said, if you like it, eat as much as you want. And had tomato sauce all over her mouth and mumbled, Uncle's cooking is so delicious, even better than Mom's. Wendy shot her a glare, is Mom's cooking really that bad? You can only cook instant noodles. I couldn't help but laugh. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had since being reborn. Chapter 5. From that day on, Wendy became a regular at the shop. She would come every few days with Anne, sometimes during dinner time, sometimes on weekend afternoons. She wasn't the kind of chairwoman who kept herself aloof. She would call ahead to ask if there was a seat before meal times, pour her own water, and even chat with customers at the next table. One time, out of curiosity, I asked her, the Eastern Suburb Restaurant Group is so big, and you have so many restaurants under it. Why do you always come to my little shop to eat? Wendy thought for a moment and said, because the food here has wok hei. Wok hei. I was all too familiar with that term. When my master taught me back in the day, he said the highest level of cooking wasn't about rare delicacies, but about having wok hei. It's the perfect fusion of heat, ingredients, seasoning, and timing, something a machine could never replicate. You really know your food, I said. It's not that I know food, it's that I know my dad. Wendy lowered her head, stirring the soup in her bowl. His biggest wish before he passed was to open his own restaurant. Then he got sick, and it never happened. I didn't say anything and poured her another cup of tea. Anne was drawing beside me, she sketched a stove with a pot on it, steam rising from the pot. She held up the drawing to show me, Uncle, I drew you. I took the drawing and looked at it for a long time. It was crooked, the stove was a trapezoid, the pot an oval, and the steam a few wavy lines. But I put that drawing in my drawer, right next to that handwritten recipe book. Days passed one after another. The shop's business gradually picked up, and word of mouth brought more and more diners. I couldn't handle it alone, so I hired 2 kitchen assistants and 1 food runner. I was very strict about the dishes, every single one had to meet the standard. Even a gram less of salt meant redoing it. The assistants complained endlessly, but the skills they learned were real. 2 months later, the shop started turning a profit. Not much, 20 to 30,000 a month, but it was steady. I sat at the shop entrance with the ledger in hand and lit a cigarette. 2,300,000 in capital, and after 2 months, I had recouped a bit. At this rate, it would take 2 years to break even. No rush. In my past life, I rushed my whole life, rushed to make money, rushed to support my family, rushed to prove myself. In the end, I rushed into nothing but a green hat and a death notice. This time, I won't rush. The peaceful days didn't last long. One evening at the end of November, an uninvited guest showed up at the shop. Hugh. He was wearing a black leather jacket, accompanied by 2 men, swaggering in and sitting down at the table right in the center. Victor, business is good, huh? Hugh crossed his legs and lit a cigarette. I heard the noise from the kitchen and walked out with a spatula in hand. Seeing Hugh's face, I didn't panic. Hugh, this shop is mine. You're not welcome here. Please leave. Leave. Hugh flicked his ash. Victor, you screwed Fiona out of 1,800,000. You think that's the end of it? Half of that money was mine. I set the wok down on the table, not loudly, but firmly, that 180,000 was decided by the court. If you've got the guts, go sue me. Making a scene in my shop only embarrasses yourself. I'm not here to make a scene today. Hugh stood up, stubbing out his cigarette on the table, leaving a black burn mark. I'm here to give you a heads up. Fiona's brother got out. You know that kid, 3 years in prison, he's capable of anything. He says he's coming for you. You'd better watch your back. With that, Hugh and his men left. I stood there, staring at the black burn mark left by the cigarette on the table, slowly clenching my fists. Fiona's brother, Luke. 3 years ago, he was sentenced to 3 years for severely beating someone, and he just got out. That kid is a real lunatic, the kind who'd pull a knife on someone when he's drunk. In my past life, I didn't have much to do with him, because by then I was already in the ICU after the explosion. But in this life, I took out my phone and called Chief Zhou again. Chief Zhou, there's something I'd like to report to you. I relayed Hugh's words verbatim. After listening, Chief Zhou said, I understand. I'll keep an eye on this person. You be careful too, and call the police immediately if anything happens. Thank you, Chief Zhou. After hanging up, I started thinking about one question. If Luke really comes looking for trouble, what should I do? Fight? I'm just a cook, should I take on someone with a kitchen knife? Call the police. By the time they arrive, I might already be beaten to a pulp. Hide. Where could I even go? I thought about it for a long time and finally came up with a plan. Chapter 6. The next day, I went to a hardware store. I bought a lock, a camera, and a stun baton. The lock was for the shop door, the camera was aimed at the entrance, and the stun baton was placed under the counter. Whether it would be useful or not was another matter. First, I had to arm myself. Then I sent Wendy a message, someone's been causing me trouble these past couple of days. Don't come to the shop for now. I'll let you know when things are sorted out. Wendy replied quickly, who's causing you trouble? Did you call the police? I did. But you know, those people have been in prison, they're not afraid of the police. Where are you? I'm coming over now. Don't come, seriously. You have and with you, it's not safe. Then come to my place. The group headquarters has security, it's safe. I hesitated for a moment and sent a single word, okay. Wendy sent a location. The Eastern Suburb Catering Group headquarters was in the development zone south of the city, a 12-story office building with a guard booth at the entrance and luxury cars parked in the courtyard. I drove my beat-up van to the entrance, and a security guard came out to stop me. Who are you looking for? Wendy. Do you have an appointment? I was about to make a phone call when Wendy walked out of the lobby. The security guard hesitated for a moment before quickly stepping aside. Today, Wendy was wearing a gray business suit, her hair tied up, making her look much sharper than usual. But when she walked up to me, her tone was gentle. Come inside and talk. I followed her onto the elevator and got off on the 12th floor. The chairman's office was bigger than my entire store. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the panoramic view of the southern part of the city unfolded, with distant mountains faintly visible. Have a seat. Wendy poured me a cup of tea, then sat down across from me. Go ahead, tell me what's going on. I didn't hold back and gave her the key points of my situation. I didn't mention being reborn, but I told her about my ex-wife's insurance fraud, the mistress's threats, and the trouble my brother might cause once he was released. After listening, Wendy's expression shifted from calm to stern. You shouldn't have to deal with this kind of person alone. She took out her phone and dialed a number. Help me look into someone, Luke, sentenced to 3 years for intentional injury 3 years ago, just released. Yes, find out where he is now and what he's up to. After hanging up the phone, she said to me, stay with me for a few days. Let me sort things out first. Stay here. The company has employee dormitories, some are empty. I'll have someone prepare a room for you. I opened my mouth to refuse, but seeing Wendy's expression, I swallowed my words. That look wasn't pity, nor politeness, it was, how should I put it? A kind of certainty that said, you saved my daughter, and I won't let anything happen to you. Okay, I said. The employee dormitory was in the back building of the headquarters, a single room with a bed, a desk, and a private bathroom. The first night I moved in, I couldn't sleep. Not because I wasn't used to the bed, but because I was pondering a question. In my past life, after I died, would anyone have felt regret? Fiona wouldn't. She couldn't wait for me to die. Hugh wouldn't. He was eager to collect the money. That child, who wasn't my daughter, probably wouldn't even attend the funeral. What about my parents? When I thought about this, my nose stung. My parents lived in our hometown, and I barely saw them a few times a year. In my past life, I worked desperately to make money, sending 2,000 yuan home every month, hoping to give them a better life. Later, I died, and Fiona took the insurance money, not giving a single cent to my parents. My parents didn't even get to see my ashes. Because I was burned beyond recognition, Fiona signed the cremation consent form directly, didn't even buy an urn, and just put my ashes in some random jar. I heard all this while I was in the ICU. Fiona was on a video call with Hugh, with the speakerphone on, saying every word loud and clear. Why buy such an expensive urn? It's not like his parents are going to see it anyway. Just find some random jar, toss it in the funeral home, and that's it. I'm telling you, with this 120,000 in hand, we split it 50-50. I'll get plastic surgery, and you can get a new car. I close my eyes and push those images away. In this life, I'm going to give my parents a good life. No matter what it takes. Early the next morning, I called my parents. Mom, business is going well here. I'll bring you both over to stay in a while. My mom said, oh, why bother bringing us over? We're doing just fine back home. Just take care of yourself. Mom, I have money now. Really? Save your money, don't waste it. It's not easy for you out there alone. I didn't mention Fiona. I was afraid my mom would worry. After hanging up, I stood by the window, looking at the morning light outside, and took a deep breath. In this life, there are a few things I need to do. First, grow the shop. Second, bring my parents here. Third, find someone truly worth my devotion. As for Fiona and Hugh, live or die, it's none of my business anymore. Chapter 7. Luke showed up, as expected. On the fifth night, while I was stir-frying in the shop, 3 people burst through the door. Leading them was Luke, with a scar on his forehead and a look so fierce it seemed like he wanted to devour me. Victor. Luke spoke. I put down the spatula, my hand slowly reaching for the stun gun under the counter. I'm here. My sister said, you fork over 500,000, and this matter is settled. Otherwise. Luke pulled a folding knife from behind his waist, twirling it in his hand. Otherwise, I'll make sure this shop of yours can't stay open. I gripped the switch of the stun gun, my face expressionless. Your sister owes me, the court has already ruled. If you want money, go ask her. Luke said, my sister has no money. All the money is in your hands. That's my money. Your money. Luke took a step forward, the tip of the knife pointing at my face. You raised my niece for 5 years, and my sister hasn't even asked you for child support. And now you have the nerve to make her pay? Who the hell do you think you are? I didn't move. I was waiting. Waiting for something. Ding, my phone rang. A message from Wendy, the police will be here in 2 minutes. I breathed a sigh of relief. Luke was still cursing when he suddenly heard the police sirens outside and his face changed. Did you call the fucking cops? I smiled, took out the stun baton, and placed it on the counter. I didn't call the cops, someone called them for me. 3 police cars stopped at the store entrance, and more than a dozen officers got out, led by Chief Zhou. Luke dropped the knife and tried to run, but was tackled to the ground by 2 officers at the door. The other 2 didn't get away either. One was cornered in the bathroom, and the other broke his leg jumping out the window. Chief Zhou walked over, glanced at me, and asked, "Are you okay?" "It's nothing. We've been keeping an eye on this Luke for several days. We followed him when he left his house tonight." I was taken aback. "How did you know he was coming tonight?" "Someone tipped us off." Chief Zhou glanced toward the door. Wendy was standing by the police car, wearing a black coat, holding her phone, and talking to a man in a suit beside her. I walked over, and Wendy hung up the phone, looking at me. "Can I still eat the food from your restaurant tonight?" "Yes, you can." "Then stir-fry 2 dishes for me. I haven't had dinner yet." I looked at her face and suddenly felt a lump in my throat. I wanted to say thank you, wanted to ask why you're so good to me, wanted to ask if you have feelings for me. But in the end, I said nothing and turned into the kitchen. Wendy finished eating, wiped her mouth, stood up, and said, "I've arranged the security guard for you. Someone will come to the shop tomorrow." "How much?" I asked. "How much for what?" "The security guard's fee." Wendy glanced at me. "You don't have to pay." "No, this is my own matter. I can't let you spend money on it." Wendy stared at me for 3 seconds, then suddenly smiled. "Victor, you're a good person in every way, but you're just too stubborn." With that, she turned and walked away. I stood at the doorway, watching her car disappear around the street corner. The spatula was still in my hand. Luke was detained for 15 days for threatening with a knife and causing a disturbance. After he was released, his sister Fiona came to pick him up in person. Lawyer Sue told me about this. "Victor, let me tell you something interesting. Out of Fiona's 1.8 million, 600,000 came from Hugh. Hugh is broke now, his car dealership is about to go under, and he's been hounding Fiona for money every day. The two of them have fallen out." "Fallen out?" "Yeah, Hugh says Fiona was not only with him but also with someone else. Fiona denies it, so Hugh beat her up." After hearing this, I felt nothing. Dogs biting dogs, all fur and mouth. It has nothing to do with me. "Oh, by the way, there's one more thing," Lawyer Sue said. "Fiona wants to send the child to your place, saying the child misses you." I was silent for 3 seconds. "Tell her the child has nothing to do with me. If she sends him over, I'll call the police." "All right." After hanging up, I continued cooking. In the evening, Wendy came again. This time she didn't bring the child, came alone, dressed casually in jeans and a white t-shirt, with her hair loose. Wendy sat down, and I brought the dishes I had cooked to the table, sitting across from her as she ate. "What are you looking at?" Wendy looked up. "Watching you eat." "What's there to see?" "Plenty." Wendy's hand paused for a moment, then she continued eating as if nothing had happened. But the tips of her ears turned red. I noticed, and my heart skipped a beat. I wanted to say something, but I was afraid of saying the wrong thing. "Victor." Wendy put down her spoon. Have you ever thought about expanding your shop?" "I've thought about it." "How would you go about it?" I thought for a moment, open branches, build a brand, standardize. Wendy nodded. Dongjiao has 6 catering brands under its umbrella. "If you're willing, I can help you incubate one." "Incubation?" "It means I provide the investment, and you run the show. I put up the money, you bring the technology and management. If we make a profit, we split it 50-50. I said nothing. This wasn't a small favor, it was a real, tangible partnership. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Wendy looked at me, her eyes clear and unlike a businessperson's. "Because you saved my daughter's life. And because the food you cook tastes like my father's." "That's it?" "That's it." I was silent for a long time, then extended my hand. "Pleasure doing business with you." Wendy took my hand, her palm warm, the pressure just right. Happy cooperation. 6 months later. The second store opened. It was in the city center, 300 square meters, with renovations costing 800,000. On opening day, every seat was filled. I stood in the back kitchen, watching 8 stoves blazing at once, the range hood roaring, the assistants bustling around. In a daze, I thought back to that night a year ago. Standing in that shabby little shop, the gas canister moved outside, the police storming in, my ex-wife being arrested. Back then, I had nothing, just my life and a kitchen knife. Now, over 3 million in the bank, 2 stores, more than 20 employees. My parents have already moved from our hometown, living in a 3-bedroom apartment in the east of the city. My mom makes me soup every day, and my dad helps pick vegetables at the store. Life really seemed to have started anew. But I always felt that something was missing. What was missing? I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Until one day, Wendy came to the restaurant for a meal, bringing Anne along. After finishing her meal, Anne suddenly ran over and tugged at my sleeve. "Uncle, can you be my dad?" I was stunned. Wendy was stunned too, her face turning bright red. "Anne. Don't talk nonsense." Anne pouted. "I'm not talking nonsense. All my classmates' dads pick them up from school, but I don't have one. I want Uncle Victor to be my dad." I crouched down and looked into Anne's eyes. "Anne, I'd like to be your dad too. But for that to happen, your mom has to agree." And turned to look at Wendy. "Mom, do you agree?" Wendy's face turned as red as an apple. She opened her mouth but said nothing, then picked up the glass of water on the table and drank it all in one go. I stood up and looked at her. We stared at each other for 3 seconds. Then Wendy turned her head away and said, in a voice so soft it was almost inaudible, "I'll think about it." I smiled. Not a smug smile, but the kind that says, "So the heavens have finally been kind to me." That night, after the shop closed, I sat alone at the entrance and lit a cigarette. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Wendy. "Tomorrow night, I'll be waiting for you at headquarters. I have something to tell you." I stared at the line of text and suddenly felt something in my heart let go. I stubbed out the cigarette, stood up, and glanced at the starry sky above. Thank you, God, for giving me a second chance. I can't guarantee I'll live a perfect life, but I promise I won't let any genuine sincerity down again. The next evening, I went to the headquarters building. Wendy stood at the office door, wearing a white dress. 2 dishes were laid out on the coffee table. "Did you make these?" I asked. "Try it." I took a bite of the ribs. The cooking time was a bit off, but the flavor was still good. "Delicious." She smiled and sat across from me. After the meal, she pulled out a document and slid it over to me. The cooperation agreement. I made a revised version. I flipped to the last clause, which read, "If both parties become married, this agreement shall automatically convert into a marital property agreement." I looked up at her. She blushed and said, "Don't overthink it. This is just a business term." I took her hand. "Wendy, marry me." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. 3 months later, we got our marriage license. And finally started calling me Dad. As for Fiona, I heard that Hugh had a falling out with her car dealership went bankrupt, and she was under investigation for insurance fraud. I didn't bother to care anymore. Some people, you never need to see again in this lifetime. One weekend evening, I stood in the kitchen and saw Wendy and Anne sitting in the shop through the window. Anne was drawing, and she was looking at her phone. The sunset shone on them, golden and warm. I picked up the spatula, and the oil in the pan was hot. This life, it was worth it.